Hello, friends. It's Gerald the Giraffe here. I'm so glad I could be joining you today. Miss Lang said that you guys are currently reading Harry Potter, which is one of my favorite books, so I'm going to continue where she left off yesterday. Hope you have been outside and enjoyed the warm weather, and here we go. A Death Day party, said Hermione, keenly, when Harry had changed at last and joined her and Ron in the common room. I bet there aren't many living people who can say they've been to one of those. It'll be fascinating. Why would anyone want to celebrate the day they died, said Ron, who was halfway through his potions homework and grumpy. Sounds dead depressing to me. Rain was still lashing the windows, which were now inky black, but inside all looked bright and cheerful. The firelight glowed over the countless squashy armchairs where people sat reading, talking, and doing homework. Or, in the case of Fred and George Weasley, trying to find out what would happen if you fed a filibuster firework to a salamander. Fred had rescued the brilliant orange fire-dwelling lizard from the care of magical creatures class, and it was now smoldering gently on a table surrounded by a knot of curious people. Harry was at the point of telling Ron and Hermione about Filch and the quick spell course, when the salamander suddenly whizzed into the air, emitting loud sparks and bangs as it whirled wildly round the room. The sight of Percy bellowing himself hoarse at Fred and George, the spectacular display of tangerine stars showering from the salamander's mouth, and its escape into the fire, with accompanying explosions, drove both Filch and the quick spell in envelope from Harry's mind. By the time Halloween arrived, Harry was regretting his rash promise to go to the Death Day party. The rest of the school had been happily anticipating their Halloween feasts. The great hall had been decorated with the usual live bats. Hagrid's vast pumpkins had been carved into lanterns large enough for 3 men to sit in. And there were rumors that Dumbledore had booked a troupe of dancing skeletons for the entertainment. A promise is a promise, Hermione reminded Harry bossily. You said you'd go to the Death Day party. So at 7 o'clock, Harry, Ron, and Hermione walked straight past the doorway to the packed great hall, which, with the glittering invitingly with gold plates and candles, directed their steps towards the dungeons. The passageway led to nearly Headless Nick's party had been lined with candles too, though the effect was far from cheerful. These were long, jet black, thin tapers, all burning bright blue, casting a dim, ghostly light even over their own living faces. The temperature dropped with every step they took. As Harry shivered and drew his robes tightly around him, he heard what sounded like 1,000 fingernails scraping on an enormous blackboard. Is this supposed to be music? Ron whispered. They turned a corner and saw nearly Headless Nick standing at the doorway, hung with black velvet drapes. My dear friends, he said mournfully, welcome, welcome. So pleased you could come. He swept off his plumed hat and bowed them inside. It was an incredible sight. The dungeon was filled with hundreds of pearly white translucent people, mostly drifting through a crowded dance floor, waltzing to the dreadful quavering sound of 30 musical saws played by an orchestra on a raised, black-draped platform. A chandelier overhead blazed midnight blue with 1,000 more black candles. Their breath rose in a mist before them, and it was like stepping into a freezer. Shall we have a look around? Harry suggested, wanting to warm up his feet. Careful not to walk through anyone, said Ron nervously, and they set off around the edge of the dance floor. They passed a group of gloomy nuns, a ragged man wearing chains, and a fat friar, a cheerful Hufflepuff ghost who was talking to a knight with an arrow sticking out of his forehead. Harry wasn't surprised to see that the Bloody Baron, a gaunt, staring, slithering ghost, covered in silver bloodstains, was being given a wide berth by all the other ghosts as well. Oh no, said Hermione, stopping abruptly. Turn back, turn back! I don't want to talk to Moaning Myrtle. Who? Said Harry, and backtracked quickly. She haunts one of the toilets in the girls' bathroom on the first floor, said Hermione. She haunts a toilet? Yes, it's been out of order all year because she keeps having tantrums and flooding the place. I never went in there anyway if I could avoid it. It's awful trying to have to pee with her wailing at you. Look, food, said Ron. On the other side of the dungeon was a long table also covered in black velvet. They approached it eagerly, but by the next moment had stopped in their tracks, horrified. The smell was quite disgusting. Large, rotten fish were laid on handsome silver platters. Cakes burned charcoal black were heaped on salves, where there were great maggoty haggis, a slab of cheese covered in fury green mold, and in pride of place an enormous gray cake in the shape of a tombstone, with tar-like icing formed the words, Sir Nicholas D. Mimsy Poppington, died 31st October 1492. Harry watched amazed as a portly ghost approached the table, crouched low, and walked through it. his mouth held wide so that it passed through one of the stinking salmon. "Can you taste it if you walk through it?" Harry asked him. "Almost," said the ghost sadly, and he drifted away. "I'd expected they let it rot to give it the stronger flavor," said Hermione, knowledgeably, pinching her nose and leaning closer to look at the putrid haggis. "Can we move? I feel sick," said Ron. They had barely turned, however, when a little man swooped suddenly from under the table and came to a halt mid-air before them. "Hello, Peeves," said Harry cautiously. Unlike the ghosts around them, Peeves the poltergeist was the very reverse of a pale and transparent. He was wearing a bright orange party hat, a revolving bow tie, and a broad grin on his wide, stricken face. "No thanks," said Hermione. "Heard you talking about poor Myrtle," said Peeves, his eyes dancing. "Rude you was about poor Myrtle." He took a deep breath and bowed. "Oi, Myrtle!" "Oh, no, Peeves, don't tell her what I said. She'll be really upset," Hermione said frantically. "I didn't mean it. I didn't mind. Hello, Myrtle." The squat ghost of a girl had glided over. She had the glummest face Harry had ever seen, half hidden behind lank hair and thick, partly spectacles. "What?" she said sulkily. "How are you, Myrtle?" said Hermione in a falsely bright voice. "It's nice to see you out of the toilet." Myrtle sniffed. "Miss Granger was just talking about you," said Peeves slyly in Myrtle's ear. "Just saying how nice you look tonight," said Hermione, glaring at Peeves. Myrtle eyed Hermione suspiciously. "You're making fun of me," she said, silver tears welling rapidly in her small see-through eyes. "No, honestly, didn't I say how nice Myrtle's looking?" said Hermione, nudging Harry and Ron painfully in the ribs. "Oh, yeah, she did." "Don't lie to me," Myrtle gasped, tears now flooding down her face, while Peeves chuckled happily over her shoulder. "Did you think I don't know what people call me behind my back? Fat Myrtle, ugly Myrtle, miserable, moaning, moping Myrtle." "You've forgotten Pimply," Peeves hissed in her ear. Moaning Myrtle burst into anguished sobs and fled from the dungeon. Peeves shot after her, pelting her with moldy peanuts, yelling, "Pimply, Pimply!" "Oh dear," said Hermione sadly. Nearly Headless Nick now drifted toward them through the crowd. "Enjoying yourselves?" "Oh yes," they lied. "Not a bad turnout," said Nearly Headless Nick proudly. "The Wailing Widow came all the way up from Kent. It's nearly time for my speech. I'd better go and warn the orchestra." The orchestra, however, stopped playing at that very moment. They, and everyone else in the dungeon, fell silent, looking around in excitement as the haunting horn sounded. "Oh, here we go," said Nearly Headless Nick bitterly. Through the dungeon wall burst a dozen ghost horses, each ridden by headless horsemen. The assembly clapped wildly. Harry started to clap too, but stopped suddenly at the sight of Nick's face. The horses galloped in the middle of the dance floor and halted, rearing and plunging. At the front of the pack was a large ghost who held his bearded head under his arm, from which position he was blowing the horn. The ghost leapt down, lifted his head high in the air so that the whole crowd could see that his head was off from his back. And Nearly Headless Nick squashing his head back onto his neck. "Nick," he roared, "how are ya? Head still hanging in there?" He gave a hearty gobble and clapped Nearly Headless Nick on the shoulder. "Welcome, Patrick," said Nick stiffly. "Livin'!" said Sir Patrick, spotting Harry, Ron, and Hermione, and giving a huge fake jump of astonishment so that his head fell off again. The crowd howled with laughter. "Very amusing," said Nearly Headless Nick darkly. "Don't mind Nick," shouted Sir Patrick, head from the floor. "Still upset he won't let him join the hunt, but I mean to say, look at that fellow." "I think," said Harry hurriedly, at a meaningful look from Nick, "Nick's very frightening, and, ha!" yelled Sir Patrick's head. "Bet he asked you to say that." "If I could have everyone's attention, it's time for my speech," said Nearly Headless Nick, loudly striding to the podium and climbing onto the icy blue spotlight. "My late lamented lords, ladies, and gentlemen, is my great sorrow." But nobody heard much more. Sir Patrick and the rest of the Headless Hunt had just started a game of head hockey, and the crowd was turning to watch. Nearly Headless Nick tried vainly to recapture his audience, but gave up as Sir Patrick's head went sailing past him to loud cheers. Harry was very cold by now, not to mention hungry. "I can't stand much more of this," Ron muttered, his teeth chattering, as the orchestra ground back into action and the ghosts swept back onto the dance floor. "Let's go," said Harry. They backed toward the door, nodding and beaming up at anyone who looked at them, and a minute later were hurrying back up the passageway, full of black candles. "Pudding might not be finished yet," said Ron hopefully, leading the way to the steps of the entrance. And then Harry heard it. "Rip, tear, kill." It was the same voice, the same cold, murderous voice he had heard in Lockhart's office. He stulted to a halt, clutching at the stone wall and listening with all his might. looking around, squinting up and down the dimly lit passage. Harry, what are you? It's that voice again. Shut up for a minute. So hungry for so long. Listen, said Harry urgently, and Ron and Hermione froze, watching him. Kill. Time to kill. The voice was growing fainter. Harry was sure it was moving away, moving upward. A mixture of fear and excitement gripped him as he stared at the dark ceiling. How could it be moving upward? Was it a phantom to whom stone ceilings didn't matter? This way, he shouted, and he began to run up the stairs, into the entrance hall. It was no good hoping to hear anything here. The babble of talk from the Halloween feast was echoing off the great hall. Harry sprinted up the marble staircases to the first floor, and Ron and Hermione clattering behind him. Harry, what are we? Shh! Harry strained his ears distantly from the floor above, and growing fainter still, he heard the voice. I smell blood! I smell blood! His stomach lurched. It's going to kill someone, he shouted, and ignoring Ron's and Hermione's bell-during faces, he ran up the next flight of stairs 3 at a time, trying to listen over the pounding footsteps. Harry hurtled around the whole of the second floor, Ron and Hermione panting behind him, not stopping until they turned a corner at last into a deserted passage. Harry, what was that all about? Said Ron, wiping sweat off his face. I couldn't hear anything. But Hermione gave a sudden gasp and pointed down the corridor. Look! Something was shining on the wall ahead. They approached slowly, squinting through the darkness. Foot-high words had been daubed onto the wall between 2 windows, shimmering in the light cast by the flaming torches. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware. Okay. I'm going to stop there. Gerald, it is so nice that I've been able to be here. Miss Lang is so amazing that she let me come on and read to you folks. I heard Miss Lang tell me that you have spring break next week, so I will not be seeing you, and Miss Lang will not be seeing you next week to read. However, I think Monday the 6th she will be reading again. Hopefully we will all be able to be in school together, but Miss Lang told me that if not, she's excited to still do DLDs and read to you on here. Anyway, great to see you folks again. Gerald here once again. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for listening.